In the spring of 401 BC, a Greek army marches north along the river Tigris, deep in hostile territory. They are 10,000 mercenaries, led by a sharp-eyed Athenian named Xenophon, and they are lost. As they trudge near the site of modern Mosul, they pass a colossal ruin. A vast, grass-covered mound looms over the river, crowned with the crumbling foundations of a stone wall. Xenophon asks the locals what it was. They give him a name, Mespila, and a story about a forgotten people. He dutifully writes it down, never realizing he is gazing upon the ghost of Nineveh, the former capital of the most feared empire on earth. Not 200 years after its fall, the name of the city that made kings tremble had been wiped from living memory. How does a superpower die so completely that its heart becomes a nameless hill? This is the story of the fall of Assyria, an empire of iron and terror brought to ruin in a single lifetime. To understand the fall, we must first stand at the peak. From its heartland on the upper Tigris, the Neo-Assyrian Empire methodically conquered the known world from roughly 911 to 609 BC. At its zenith, under its last great king, Ashurbanipal, its shadow stretched from the mountains of Iran to the deserts of Egypt, from the shores of the Persian Gulf to the hills of Anatolia. This was more than a kingdom. It was a machine, engineered for conquest and control. Its engine was the world's first truly professional army. Infantry armed with iron-tipped spears, massed archers who could darken the sky, and a siege train that was the marvel and terror of the age. Great wheeled rams with bronze heads splintered city gates, while sappers undermined walls from below. Every campaign was a logistical masterpiece. A system of provincial governors and a network of royal roads, the Nagir Ekali, ensured that grain, arms, and men moved with relentless efficiency across thousands of kilometers. This empire was run on paperwork and fear. In the palaces of Nineveh, scribes recorded everything on clay tablets, tribute lists, troop movements, spy reports, and on the palace walls, they carved the state's ideology in stone for all to see. In the southwest palace, King Sennacherib commissioned the Lachish reliefs, a frame-by-frame account of his siege of a Judean city in 701 BC. We see the great earthen ramp built by laborers under a hail of arrows. We see the battering rams grinding against the walls. We see Judean families marched into exile and rebel leaders impaled on stakes outside the city. It was both a historical record and a brutal warning. This is the price of defiance. State terror was policy. Mass deportation was a tool of imperial engineering. King Sargon II boasted of marching 27,290 people from the city of Samaria after its capture. While the number is royal propaganda, the practice was real. Communities were uprooted to break their rebellious spirit and repopulate strategic frontiers with skilled workers who owed their lives to the king. Presiding over this system was Ashurbanipal, a man of chilling contradictions. He was the empire's most erudite monarch, a scholar who bragged he could read complex cuneiform scripts from before the Great Flood. In his palace at Nineveh, he assembled the ancient world's first great library, some 30,000 clay tablets, methodically collected and catalogued. It held epics like Gilgamesh, medical texts, astronomical observations, and dictionaries. Yet this same king was a master of cruelty. After crushing the rival kingdom of Elam, he wrote, "I destroyed Susa, I sowed salt in its fields, I turned it into a wasteland." He had the head of the Elamite king brought to Nineveh and hung in his garden as a decoration. For Ashurbanipal, knowledge was power, and so was absolute, terrifying violence. This was Assyria at its height, a literate, organized, and ruthlessly efficient superpower that seemed destined to last forever. But empires built on fear are brittle. The sheer size of Assyria was a source of weakness. Holding Egypt required constant, costly campaigns to put down revolts. The long, brutal wars against Elam drained the treasury and the army. Every vassal king from the Levant to the Zagros Mountains harbored resentment, waiting for a moment of weakness. Nature itself may have turned against the empire. Recent climate studies suggest that the heartland of Assyria suffered from a cycle of intense, multi-decade droughts around the mid-7th century BC. Less rain meant smaller harvests, straining the granaries that fed the cities and the armies. A stressed environment put stress on the state. Then, the center began to rot. When Ashurbanipal died around 631 BC, the succession is murky, but it was certainly bloody. A series of kings, Ashur-etil-ilani, Sin-shumu-lashir, and Sin-shar-ishkun, fought each other for the throne. Civil war tore the empire apart, wasting veteran armies on internal squabbles. The empire's enemies smelled blood. To the south, in the marshes of Babylonia, a Chaldean leader named Nabopolassar saw his chance. For years he waged a guerrilla war, bleeding the Assyrian garrisons. In 626 BC, he finally captured Babylon and crowned himself king, creating a new, aggressive power on Assyria's southern flank. To the east, in the mountains of Iran, a king named Cyaxares was uniting the scattered Median tribes into a formidable new kingdom. These weren't just opportunistic raiders, they were patient, determined state builders who had learned warfare from the Assyrians themselves. In 614 BC, Cyaxares and his Medes struck a devastating blow. They bypassed the military capital of Nineveh and marched on Ashur, the ancient religious heart of the empire. The city fell. Its temples were plundered, its priests slaughtered. The news was a spiritual amputation for Assyria. Their chief god, Ashur, had failed to protect his own sacred city. For a state that ruled by divine right, it was a catastrophic loss of legitimacy. The end came with astonishing speed. 2 years after the fall of Ashur, in the summer of 612 BC, the two new powers converged. The armies of Nabopolassar of Babylon and Cyaxares of the Medes formed a grand coalition and laid siege to Nineveh itself. The city was a fortress, its circuit of walls stretching for 12 kilometers, enclosing vast reserves of food and water. It should have held for years. Instead, it fell in about 3 months. The Babylonian Chronicles record the siege tersely, from the month of Simanu to the month of Abu, roughly June to August. We can only imagine the final days, the relentless assault, the failure of a desperate counterattack, the breach of the massive gates. The Assyrian king, Sin-shar-ishkun, disappears from the record, likely dying in the flames of his own palace. The victors, the chronicle states, carried off vast booty and spoil, and turned the city into a ruin mound. Archaeology confirms the story with a thick layer of ash and charcoal, the final sentence in Nineveh's history. But Assyria was not quite dead. A survivor of the royal family, Ashur-uballit II, escaped the slaughter and fled west to the city of Harran. There he declared himself king of a shattered empire. In a strange twist of fate, his old enemy Egypt came to his aid. Pharaoh Necho II, fearing the rise of Babylon more than the ghost of Assyria, marched his army north to prop up the failing state. For 3 years, From 612 to 609 BC, Harran served as the last capital of Assyria. But the coalition of Babylonians and Medes was relentless. In 609 BC, they marched on Harran, and it too fell. The last Assyrian king became a king in exile, a fugitive with a crown. The final, decisive blow came 4 years later, in 605 BC, at the city of Carchemish on the Euphrates. There, the young Babylonian crown prince Nebuchadnezzar met the combined Egyptian and Assyrian remnant army and annihilated it. The last Assyrian soldiers were slain or scattered. The last hope was extinguished. The empire was over. On the ground, the collapse was a slow unwinding of an entire world. Garrisons surrendered. Governors switched allegiance. Tax caravans stopped arriving. A message sent from a frontier fort would simply receive no reply. A century later, a local shepherd might stub his toe on a strange, inscribed piece of baked clay. For over 2,000 years, Assyria slept beneath its mounds. Then, in the mid-19th century, European explorers, armed with ancient texts, began to dig. At the mound Xenophon had called Mespila, they found what they were looking for. The palaces of the Assyrian kings emerged from the earth. They unearthed the colossal winged bulls, the Lamassu, that had once guarded the palace gates. They uncovered the Lachish reliefs, a frozen documentary of an ancient war. And, most incredibly, they found the library of Ashurbanipal. Tens of thousands of tablets, fire-baked and preserved by the very blaze that destroyed the city. From those fragments, scholars pieced together the history, the beliefs, and the brutal inner workings of the empire. Empires imagine themselves to be permanent. Their kings carve their triumphs in stone, convinced they are speaking for eternity. But Assyria's story is a chilling reminder of how fast and how completely a world can end. In the space of a single decade, the greatest power on earth was broken, its cities sacked, and its armies destroyed. Within a few generations, its very name was a half-forgotten rumor. The silent mounds by the Tigris hold a warning that power is transient, that memory is fragile, and that even the strongest walls will one day be buried under the quiet patience of the grass. If you find value in these stories of rise and fall, consider subscribing to Dustkings. More journeys into the past await. Thank you for walking the old roads with me today.